Welcome to Cozy English. Tonight's stories are about love. Not just romantic love, though there is plenty of that here, but love in all its quieter forms too. The love that builds slowly between people who were not sure about each other at first. The love that survives an argument, or a long silence, or a difference of opinion that turned out not to matter as much as it seemed. The love between people who have known each other so long that knowing becomes something different from knowing, becomes something more like being known. These are not stories about grand gestures. There are no declarations in the rain. What you will hear tonight are the smaller, realer things. A conversation that changed something, a choice made in a quiet moment, the particular quality of sitting beside someone you trust when the world outside is very loud. Let the English come to you as you rest. You do not need to chase it. Just breathe and listen, and let the words do their slow work. And before we begin, if this channel is something you return to, please subscribe. It is the simplest thing you can do, and it makes an enormous difference to us. Tell a friend who is learning English. Leave us a comment in the morning. We read them all, and they matter more than you know. Now, here are the stories. Story 1. How they met. They had a story they told at dinner parties, and a story that was true. The dinner party version was cleaner. It had a beginning, a middle, and a turn. The moment when they realized something was happening. It was warm and funny, and the people who heard it smiled in the right places, and sometimes said, "That's such a good story." The true version was messier, which is the nature of true versions. They had met at a mutual friend's birthday party in a flat that was too small for the number of people inside it. Elena had been standing near the kitchen because she always stood near kitchens at parties, not because she was hungry, but because kitchens had exits, and the option of exiting was calming, even when she didn't use it. Tom had been standing near the kitchen because the kitchen was near the drinks. They had spoken for about 12 minutes. Elena had not thought about him afterward. Tom had thought about her on the bus home, and then not thought about her for 3 weeks. They had met again at the same friend's birthday the following year. This was a coincidence, or the natural consequence of having the same friend and the friend having the same birthday every year, depending on how you looked at it. Tom had recognized Elena. Elena had recognized Tom with a slight delay, and then with more certainty than she expected. They had talked for longer this time, an hour maybe. Elena had not stood near the kitchen. They had found a corner of the living room and stayed in it, and the party had moved around them like water around two rocks. She had given him her number, which she did not usually do. He had texted her the following day, which he did not usually do. Their first date had been fine, good even, but not extraordinary. It was the second date that was extraordinary, or rather, the walk after the second date, when they had been talking for 4 hours and had both missed the last train home and had stood on the pavement in the cold deciding what to do, and there had been a moment, a small, still moment, when they had both understood that something had changed, that this was the beginning of something, though neither of them said it. "How did you know?" people asked. "We just knew," they said, in the dinner party version, which was true. It was also a simplification of a much longer, quieter, more uncertain story, which was also true, and which they kept mostly to themselves. Story 2. The Argument. The argument started over something small. This was, Mia had noticed, always the way. It started over whose turn it was to call the plumber. This was a legitimate practical matter. The kitchen tap had been dripping for 11 days, which was 11 days too many. But the argument that happened around it was not about the tap. The argument was about the invisible list. Mia knew about the invisible list. She had read about it, recognized it, could describe it precisely. It was the accumulation of small tasks that were always noticed and initiated by one person in a household and never by the other. Not the big tasks. Those were negotiated, shared, visible. The small ones. The tap. The birthday card for his mother. The light bulb in the stairwell that had needed replacing for 3 weeks. She had mentioned the list before, in abstract terms, and he had listened and said he understood and had made an effort for a while, and the effort had gradually wound down, and here they were, talking about the tap and talking about everything else. Joel was not indifferent. This was the thing she needed to hold on to, even mid-argument, because indifference would have been easier in some ways. He was present and engaged, and he loved her, and he still, somehow, did not see the things she saw. "I don't notice them," he said. "I'm not saying they don't exist. I'm saying I genuinely don't notice them." Why? This was the question neither of them knew how to answer cleanly. They made various attempts. Upbringing came up, patterns from childhood. The question of whether not noticing was the same as not caring, which it was not, which did not resolve the practical problem. They went to bed that night without having fixed anything, which was unusual for them. They were generally completers, people who tried to resolve before sleeping. In the morning, he had called the plumber. She had found a sticky note on the kettle that said, "I'm working on the list. Thank you for saying it again." She had stood in the kitchen looking at the note for a while. It was not a resolution. The tap was being fixed and the note was genuine, and the list was still invisible to him, except when she described it. But the note was also something, a choice to try, a signal that the previous night had landed. She peeled it off the kettle and put it in her pocket, and when he came downstairs she had already made the coffee, and she handed him a cup, and they were, without having explicitly decided to be, fine. The tap was fixed by Wednesday. Story 3. Long Distance. When Sam moved to Berlin, he and Clara had been together for 2 years. They had discussed it with the seriousness the situation required. They had made a plan. The plan involved visits every 6 weeks, long calls on Sunday evenings, and an agreed end date, a point 18 months ahead when Sam would either come back or Clara would join him, depending on what had happened to both their lives by then. The plan was good. The execution of the plan was imperfect, in the way that plans made in advance always are, because plans are made about a future that does not yet exist. The visits happened. The Sunday calls happened. What they had not planned for was the way the distance changed the texture of ordinary life, the way the things you share with someone when you live in the same place, the small things, the weather and the food and the stupid thing that happened at the supermarket, became effortful to transmit when you weren't there. He told her about his days and she told him about hers, and they were both trying, and yet there was a residue of experience that didn't travel, things that needed to be in the room together, in the same air, to be fully shared. They had a difficult period at the 9-month mark. Not a crisis, not the beginning of the end, just a period when the distance felt like more than geography. When he felt, on the phone, that she was slightly elsewhere, and she felt that he had built a life in Berlin that she could hear the outline of but not enter. These feelings were accurate, and they were also temporary, and they were also, ultimately, survivable. What got them through it, and they talked about this, later, with the honesty of people who have been through something and want to understand it, was that they had been willing to say, "This is hard, Not, "This is not working." Not, "I am not sure about us." Just, "This is hard, and I am finding it hard, and I wanted to say so." The saying so turned out to matter. At 18 months, Sam came back. The plan had worked, more or less, in the way plans work when they are made well and held loosely. He moved back in January, and they spent the first month simply being in the same place, walking around the same streets, eating meals across the same table, and finding that the thing between them was still there, intact, a little different for the distance perhaps, but not diminished. "Do you think it made us stronger?" someone asked them once. Clara thought about it. "I think it made us more certain," she said, which might be the same thing. Story 4. The Second Marriage. For their first 2 years together, both of them pretended, a little, that neither of them had been married before. This was not conscious. It was not deception. It was more a kind of mutual tact, an unspoken agreement to begin here, with this, with each other, and not to import too much of what had come before into the early stages of something new. Rachel was 51. Her first marriage had ended when she was 44, after 14 years, in the way that some long marriages end, not with a dramatic rupture, but with a slow uncoupling, a growing distance that had been papered over for years with busyness and children, and the conviction that things would improve, until the morning she woke up and understood that they would not. David was 53. His first marriage had ended differently, abruptly, to him at least, though he now understood that it had not been abrupt for his ex-wife, that what had felt sudden to him had been building in her for a long time. He had spent 3 years after it ended doing a kind of inventory of his own inattentiveness and finding more than was comfortable. They had met through friends, been introduced at a dinner with the light-handed nudge of people who thought 2 specific people might be good together. The dinner had lasted 4 hours, and they had left separately and texted each other before either of them was home. In the second year, they began, slowly, to talk about it, about the first marriages, not constantly, not as the defining feature of every conversation, but as a part of the story they were accumulating about each other. He told her about the inattentiveness and what he had learned from it. She told him about the papering over and about the relief, which she had not expected to feel and which had surprised and slightly embarrassed her when it was done. They told these things carefully, not to explain themselves entirely, but to give each other something true. "Do you think either of us will be different this time?" he said. "I think I know things I didn't know before," Rachel said. "I don't know if that makes me different, but I think I'll use it differently." They got married on a Saturday in October, in a small ceremony with their children and closest friends. The children, hers teenagers, his in their early 20s, were kind to each other in the careful way of people who are trying. The wedding was quiet and warm and specific to the two of them. On the train home that evening, David held her hand and said, "I'm very glad we did this." Rachel looked at him. She was glad too. She was also aware, in a way she would not have been the first time, of the work that lay ahead, the slow, daily work of choosing each other, of paying attention, of saying things rather than assuming they were felt. She was not afraid of this work. She had done it badly once, and she thought she might be ready to do it better. The train moved through the dark. She kept hold of his hand. Story 5. What she said at the end. When her grandmother was dying, she said things she had never said before, and also things she had said 100 times. And Lena sat beside the bed and listened to all of it with equal attention. The dying took longer than anyone expected. This was how it often happened, the nurses said, with a gentleness that spoke of many rooms like this one. Her grandmother was 91 and had been very strong for a long time, and even now her strength was doing something, not keeping her here exactly, but making the leaving slower. Her grandmother talked about her husband, who had been dead for 20 years. She talked about him as if he were nearby, and perhaps to her he was. And Lena did not correct her or express concern. She just listened and asked questions when the talking paused, and learned things about a marriage she had only ever seen the aftermath of. They had met just after the war. He had been a cautious man who had learned caution from difficult things, and she had been impatient with the caution until she understood where it came from. When I understood it, her grandmother said, very clearly, on the second day, I stopped being frustrated by it. You can't be frustrated by someone's reasons. You can only be frustrated by the surface, and when you see underneath the surface, the frustration just goes. Lena thought about this. She was 34 and in a relationship that was good, and that she sometimes, privately, found frustrating in specific ways. She thought about surfaces and what was underneath them. Were you happy? She asked. Her grandmother considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Mostly, she said, not every day, but mostly. The mostly is enough, if the mostly is real. Lena wrote this down afterward, in the small notebook she carried. She was not sure exactly what she would do with it, but it had been said to her, specifically, in that room, and it seemed like something that should not be lost. Her grandmother died on the morning of the third day, without Lena in the room. She had gone to get tea, which was how these things sometimes happened, the nurses said, as if the person waited for a moment alone. Lena came back and understood immediately and sat beside the bed for a long time. She called her mother. She cried, which she had not done while her grandmother was alive. She had been too focused on being present. The crying was a relief, the kind that arrives when the task is over and the feelings can finally come. She drove home in the afternoon and sat in her kitchen and called her partner, who came over and did not say much but sat with her, which was exactly right. Later she made dinner and they ate together, and she told him what her grandmother had said about surfaces and underneath surfaces, and he listened in the way he listened when something mattered, and she thought, the mostly is real. For us, the mostly is real. Story 6. Friends First. Everyone told them they should get together. They resisted this for 3 years. It was not that they did not see it. They both separately had seen something at various points over the 3 years. A warmth, a comfort, a quality of ease in each other's company that was probably not nothing. But they were friends, genuinely and specifically friends, and they had each had experiences of friendship turning into something else and then turning into the end of the friendship, and neither of them wanted to risk what they had. It's different, people said. That's what people always say, Nick said. You two are different, the people said. Nick and Priya, when they talked about it, which they did, directly, because they were the kind of friends who talked about things directly, agreed that it was probably possible that there was something there, and also possible that the something there was simply the natural warmth of a close friendship, being interpreted by outsiders as romantic. I think the question, Priya said once, is whether we would risk the friendship. I'm not sure I would, Nick said. Neither am I, she said. This was not a resolution. It was a deferral, and they both knew it. The thing that changed was not a revelation, but a context. They both happened to be single at the same time for the first time since they had been friends, and they went away for a long weekend with a group that had gradually dropped out until it was just them, and they spent 3 days in a cottage in the countryside walking and cooking and talking, and something shifted. Not dramatically, there was no moment. What happened was that by the third day, Priya noticed that she was not thinking of Nick as her friend. She was thinking of him as someone she was with. The distinction was subtle and felt enormous. She told him on the train home. She said it plainly because she had never been able to say difficult things any other way. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "I was thinking the same thing at breakfast." "At breakfast," she said. "The eggs," he said. "I was watching you make the eggs, and I thought, I want to watch this person make eggs for a very long time." She laughed, which was the only possible response. He laughed too. The train moved through the countryside, and outside the window the light was the particular gold of late afternoon, and they were, without quite having decided to be, something new. The friendship did not end. It became the foundation of the thing they built on top of it, which was better, in the way that something built on a good foundation is always better. Story 7, 30 years. They had been married for 30 years, and people kept asking them the secret. Carol and James had discussed this question between themselves, in the kitchen, on the long walks they took on weekends, because it was genuinely interesting to try to answer. Not because they needed to. They were not giving advice. They were not a model for anything, but because the question was worth asking of a life they were inside. They had not, Carol said, been happy every day. She said this to people when they asked, and some people looked slightly alarmed, as if she was being confessional, and some people nodded with recognition. 30 years was many things. It was the year their son was born, which was the most frightening and the most wonderful thing that had happened to either of them, and they had been frightened and wonderful together. It was the year James was made redundant, which had been bad, genuinely bad, a year of practical worry and some darker feelings underneath that he had not, at the time, been very good at expressing. It was the year Carol's mother died, and the year they had the extension built that went over budget and over time, and that they had fought about in ways that, now, seemed disproportionate to the building work and proportionate to the stress they were both carrying that year. It was many ordinary years, the good ordinary, the daily ordinary, the years that do not distinguish themselves but accumulate. James said, when asked, that the thing that had worked for them was talking. This was true and also slightly too simple. Many couples talked. What he meant, when he tried to be more precise, was a particular quality of talking, the willingness to say the unflattering thing, the true thing, the thing that required vulnerability. He had not been good at this at the beginning. He had learned. Carol said the thing that had worked was that they had continued to like each other. This was also true. She had seen couples who loved each other but who did not, over time, seem to like each other very much, who were held together by habit or history or duty, but who did not, when they sat down in the same room, genuinely want to be there. She and James, she thought, still wanted to be there. "Do you still love each other the same?" people sometimes asked. "No," James said. "We love each other differently. We know each other much better now, so the love is more specific. The early version is very bright. The later version is just more of everything." Carol looked at him when he said this. He had said it before, several times, but she still liked the way he said it. This was, she thought, one of the things. After 30 years, she still liked the way he said things. Story 8, The Breakup. The breakup was mutual, which was both easier and harder than the kind that is not. It was easier because no one had done something unforgivable. It was harder because there was nothing to be angry about, and anger, Zoe had discovered in previous relationships, was a kind of container. It held things, gave you somewhere to put what you were feeling, gave you energy to do the practical work of separating. Without it, you were just sad. They had been together for 2.5 years. They were not wrong for each other. They were, instead, in different places, different ideas about what the next few years would look like, different relationships to commitment and timing, and the question of where they wanted to live, which was not a small question and had turned out to be a very large one. They had the conversation on a Sunday afternoon in her kitchen. He had driven over knowing something was happening, and she had opened the door knowing it too, and they had made tea and talked around it for 20 minutes before saying the real thing. After he left, she sat at the kitchen table for a long time. She thought about what they had been. He was a good person. He was funny and careful, and he had looked after her when she was ill the previous winter, with a quiet competence that she had not taken for granted and would miss specifically. She had been good for him too. She believed this, and he had said it, and she thought it was true. But two people can be good for each other and not be for each other. She had known this theoretically for years. She knew it now in a way that had weight. Her friend B came over that evening. She did not ask Zoe how she was feeling. She brought food, put on a film they had both seen before, and sat beside her on the sofa for 3 hours. This was, Zoe thought, the exact right thing to do. She cried at some point during the film, which was not about anything sad, and B handed her a tissue without comment and did not ask what she was thinking. She was thinking about Sunday afternoons, the ones she and Dan had spent, long, unstructured, the kind that don't have an agenda. She was going to miss the particular quality of his company on Sunday afternoons most, she thought. That specific thing. The thought made her sadder. She let it. Story 9. The Letter. When he was 22, Marco wrote a letter to a woman he was in love with, and then did not send it. He kept the letter. He did not know why. He put it in the drawer of his desk and forgot about it, and then found it, 6 months later, when she was no longer someone he was in love with, when they had both moved on in the quiet way of people who had never technically started. And he read it and found it embarrassing and also, somewhere underneath the embarrassment, recognizable. He had said true things in the letter. He had said them badly, imprecisely, in the overblown way of a 22-year-old who was feeling something large and did not yet have the language for it. But underneath the imprecision were the true things, and he could still find them. He kept the letter because it seemed wrong to destroy it. It had been meant for someone, even if it had not reached her. He found it again at 35, in a drawer he was emptying during a house move, and he read it again. He was a different person at 35. He had better language now. He had said things he meant to more people, in more precise ways, and some of those things had mattered and some had not. He had been loved and had experienced the full curriculum of that. Reading the letter at 35, he felt something unexpected. Warmth. Not nostalgia exactly, not longing, just a warmth toward the 22-year-old who had written the thing and then held on to it, who had had something true in him and put it on paper and then lost his nerve, which was so human that it was almost funny. He thought about the woman. They were not in touch. He hoped she was well. He did not wish he had sent the letter. He put it in the box of things he was keeping and moved to the new house, and the letter came with him. occupying a small amount of space in a drawer, not doing anything in particular, just existing, evidence of a feeling that had been real, in a time that was gone, carried forward without purpose, but not without meaning. Story 10. Getting it wrong. The thing about getting it wrong, Helen thought, was that you had to really get it wrong before you understood how to do it differently. She was 47. She had been in 2 long relationships before the current one, and she had made different mistakes in each of them, and she had spent some time in her late 30s, in the gap between the second relationship and this one, trying to understand what the mistakes were. Not in a punishing way. She was not by nature a person who punished herself, but she was curious, and the curiosity applied to herself as well as to other things, and she had sat with the question, what had she actually done wrong, with as much honesty as she could bring to it. In the first relationship, she had not said what she wanted. She had swallowed things. She had let an accumulation happen, of unspoken needs, of compromises that had seemed small and turned out to be structural, and by the end she had been a version of herself she didn't recognize, and he had been living with someone he thought he knew but didn't. In the second, she had overcorrected. She had said everything. She had been so committed to the lesson from the first relationship that she had tipped into something else. Not honesty exactly, but a kind of relentless expressiveness that had left him very little room. He was a person who needed room, and she had not given it. Both of these things were failure modes. Both of them were about the same underlying question. How do you be fully yourself in a relationship without losing sight of the fact that there is another person in it? She did not have a complete answer at 47, but she had more of one. She had learned, imperfectly, incompletely, in the slow way of things you only learn by doing wrong first, to speak up about the things that mattered, and to let go of the things that didn't, and to know the difference, and to leave room. The current relationship was not perfect. She did not expect perfect. What it was, mostly, was something she was fully inside. Not a version of herself swallowed down, not a performance of honesty so thorough it became its own kind of noise. Just herself, in the room with someone, trying. That, she thought, was approximately the right thing. Story 11. The anniversary. Every year on their anniversary, they went back to the same restaurant. This had started by accident. It was where they had eaten on the first anniversary because it had been nearby and available, and they had liked it. And somehow returning the following year became the thing they did, and then it became a tradition, which is what happens when you do something twice. The restaurant was not exceptional. It was a good neighborhood place. Consistent food, warm lighting, small tables close together. The staff changed over the years. The waiter who had served them for the first 6 years had left at some point, and they had both noticed his absence without mentioning it for almost a year, and when they finally mentioned it, they had laughed at their own sentimentality. They had been coming for 11 years now. The ritual of the evening had its own shape. They arrived at 7:30. They ordered the same drinks to start, not because the drinks were extraordinary, but because ordering them was part of the shape of the evening. They looked at the menu and usually ended up ordering the same things they had ordered before, with occasional variations. They talked. The talking was the point, really. The restaurant was the container. The talking was what filled it. Over 11 years, the talking had covered a great deal of ground. Early anniversaries, the giddy accounting of the year, the future and its abstract promise. Middle years, the weight of actual life, money, work, the year of his mother's illness, the year of her redundancy, years that had been hard and that they had been through together. sitting at this table afterward and accounting for them. Recent years, something calmer. Not the calm of not caring, the calm of certainty, of knowing the shape of the thing you're in. This year he had said something that surprised her. He had said, "I think this is the happiest I've been." She had looked at him. "Why now?" "I don't know," he said. "I think I understand things better. I understand us better. I'm not as worried about things as I used to be." He paused. "Or maybe I'm just older." She thought about it. "I think I feel that too," she said. "Like I've stopped watching it from outside to see if it's all right. Like I'm just in it." "Yes," he said. "Like that." They ate their dinner. The restaurant was warm and the tables around them held other people and other conversations. And outside the street was doing its ordinary evening things, and they sat across from each other at the small table and were, without any drama or declaration, very glad to be there. Story 12. What Love Looks Like. Nora had thought, when she was younger, that she would recognize love by the way it felt. She had expected it to be a sensation, dramatic, unmistakable, the kind of thing that announced itself. She had been waiting, at various points in her 20s, to feel the announced thing, and had felt, instead, a variety of other feelings: interest, warmth, attraction, the particular pleasure of someone's company, none of which quite matched the announced thing she was expecting. It was her friend Diane who, at 30, said something that changed the way she was looking. "I think love is less something you feel," Diane said, "and more something you do. It's the decision to keep showing up. It's the choosing, over and over. The feeling is there, but the feeling isn't the whole thing. The whole thing is everything that happens after the feeling." Nora had sat with this. It had rearranged something. She thought about the people she had loved. She thought about the forms of love she had not counted because they had not felt the way she had expected love to feel. She thought about a relationship in her late 20s with a quiet, careful man who had never been dramatic and who she had spent 2 years with in a state of mild and persistent undervaluing, because the mild, persistent quality of it had not seemed like enough. And then she had left and been surprised, for several months after, by how much she missed him. Not the drama she hadn't had, but the specific quality of his company, the reliability of it, the way she had always known how he would be. She was 38 now. She had been with her partner Elliot for 4 years. The feeling she had for him was not the announced thing either. What it was, instead, was a deep and daily choice. The choice to be honest with him, to pay attention to him, to show up when it was inconvenient, to find his company the place she most wanted to be. He had been ill the previous winter, not seriously, a chest infection that became pneumonia, 3 weeks of difficulty. She had looked after him, practically and daily, and it had not been romantic in the conventional sense, and it had been, she thought, the most loving she had ever been, the most clearly in it. After he recovered, they had been sitting in the kitchen on a Sunday morning, and he had said, from nowhere, "Thank you for all of it." "Of course," she said. "Not everyone would have," he said. She looked at him across the kitchen. She thought about love as something you do, something you choose, something that happens in kitchens on ordinary Sunday mornings when nothing special is happening except that you are both there and glad to be. "I know," she said, "but I would." Story 8. The Morning. She had been with him for 11 years, and the thing she thought about most often, when she thought about the relationship, was not the large events but the mornings. He made coffee, she made toast. They sat at the table without speaking for a while, reading or simply looking out the window. This was not a silence born of distance. It was a silence born of knowing, the particular ease of two people who did not have to fill every space. She had not known, at the beginning, that this was what she was looking for. At the beginning, she had wanted intensity, the heightened register of early love, which was real and which she remembered. She had not known to want this. The 11 years of comfortable mornings, the familiar sounds of a life being lived alongside someone else, the undemonstrative satisfaction of being at the same table on a Thursday. She was glad she had stayed long enough to find out what love looked like in the years after the beginning. She had not always been sure she would. There had been years that were harder, years when the comfort felt like something lost rather than something gained. She had stayed. The mornings were what she had found on the other side of the staying. Story 9. The argument they always had. They had the same argument every 2 years, approximately, about the same fundamental difference, and they had learned to move through it more quickly as time went on. The argument was about a real thing, a difference in how they each thought about a particular aspect of their life together. The difference had not resolved. It was not going to resolve. They were different in this way, and the difference was structural. What had changed was their relationship to the argument. Early on, the argument had felt existential. It had raised the question of whether they were compatible, which was a frightening question. Now it raised the question of whether they could navigate the difference again, which was a more manageable question with a track record of answers. She had learned that recurring arguments in long relationships were not necessarily failures. They were the places where the differences lived, and where the work of being different people who stayed together happened. The work was not pleasant. It was not nothing either. They always came through it, not unchanged. The coming through was itself a thing that changed them, slightly, in the direction of knowing each other better. She had stopped dreading the argument, mostly. She had started to recognize it as the territory that they were, over many years, slowly learning to navigate. Story 10. The Visit. She had visited her mother every Sunday for 6 years, and when her mother died, the Sunday gap was one of the hardest things. The visits had not always been easy. Her mother was a woman with strong opinions, and they had, over the years, disagreed about things they both cared about. The Sunday visits had contained this: the difficulty of being known by someone who also had opinions about you, the friction of love that was not unconditional in the sense of having no content. And yet she had gone every Sunday, and her mother had made tea, and there had been a meal, usually, and after the meal they had talked about things that were happening, and sometimes they had watched something together on the television, and then she had gone home. After her mother died, she had Sunday afternoon free in a way she had not had in 6 years. She had not known what to do with it for almost a year. She had tried things. She had seen friends, done tasks, walked. Nothing filled the Sunday afternoon the way the Sunday afternoon had been filled. She thought about this when people asked whether she and her mother had been close. Close was not quite the right word. They had been in contact. They had been in each other's lives, specifically and consistently, in the way of two people who went somewhere together every week without deciding to and without stopping. That, she thought, might be its own kind of close. Story 11. The Long Distance Year. They had done a year of long distance, a city between them, the flight only an hour but the frequency limited, and the year had been harder than expected and had also told them something they needed to know. What it told them was that they were serious. Not in the sense that they had not known this before. They had been together 4 years. They were serious. But the year of distance had made the seriousness a choice they made actively, rather than a background condition of their proximity. Every visit was chosen. Every call was chosen. They were in the relationship on purpose, repeatedly, across a year that offered frequent opportunities to drift. They had not drifted. The year had ended, and they had been in the same city again, and she had been grateful for it in a way she had not been grateful before the year of distance. She did not recommend it as an exercise. It was hard in the particular way that missing someone is hard, which is not a dramatic hardness but a persistent low-level ache that is present in most of the day. But she thought the year had been worth what it had cost, because of what it had shown them both about what they chose. Story 12. The Photograph. She had found a photograph of them from the first year, when she was clearing out a drawer, and had looked at it for a long time. They were at a table somewhere, she could not remember where, which was strange given that the photograph was evidence that she had been there. They were looking at each other. She remembered, looking at the photograph, that she had been very happy in the first year, in the particular restless happiness of beginning something. She was happy now too, differently, settled, familiar, with the depth that came from years and the things years held. She missed nothing about the first year except the first year itself, its specific quality of freshness, the way everything was new and she did not yet know how things would go. She put the photograph back in the drawer, not in the pile to be thrown out. She kept it because it was true. It was a true document of something that had been real. It was not the whole story. No single photograph was. But it was part of the whole story, and she was glad to have it. Story 13. The Different Languages. She told people she and her partner had different love languages, which was a way of saying, we have had to learn how to speak to each other. He showed love through action, through fixing things, arranging things, doing things. She showed love through words and presence. In the early years, she had felt, sometimes, that he was absent in the ways that mattered. He had felt, sometimes, that she wanted things from him that he didn't know how to give. They had talked about this, badly at first and better later. They had made an effort to see the other's language as love rather than as its absence. She had started to see the practical care as care. He had started to provide more of the verbal presence she needed. Neither had fully converted. They had met in the middle. She thought that most long relationships required this. The translation work, the learning to read love in forms that had not come in before. The effort of translation was itself a form of love, the willingness to try to speak someone else's language, even imperfectly, because you wanted to be understood and to understand. Story 14. The Thing She Said. They had been in an argument, the real kind, not the recurring kind, but the sharp, unexpected kind that comes from something that had been waiting to be said. And she had said something that she had not planned to say, and that was, she recognized even as she said it, true. She had said, I need more from you than you've been giving, and I've been afraid to say so. The argument had stopped. He had looked at her. He had sat down. They had talked for 3 hours that evening, the kind of talking that was difficult because it was real, and that was useful because of it. She had said things she had not said. He had said things he had not said. They had found, in the space that opened up, a more accurate picture of what was happening between them. She had been afraid to say the thing for a long time because she had been afraid of the consequences. The consequences had been a 3-hour conversation that was hard and that was necessary. She was glad she had said it. She was glad the argument had opened the space. She had learned this, as a rule. The things that were hardest to say in a relationship were usually the things most worth saying. Not cruelly, not without care, but with honesty when the moment was right or when it could wait no longer. Story 15. The friendship that became more. She had been friends with him for 3 years before anything changed, and the 3 years had given the change a particular quality of safety. She had known him well. She had known how he talked about things he cared about, how he behaved when he was frustrated, how he was with other people, what he found funny. The knowledge was real before the feeling became romantic, and the sequence mattered. When the feeling arrived, it arrived with less uncertainty than she might have expected. She knew who he was. The question was whether what she wanted was consistent with what she knew. And when she tested the question honestly, it was. She had been afraid to say anything for 2 months, for the predictable reasons. The friendship was good, and the change might cost it. She had also found that 2 months of not saying anything was its own cost, paid in the background of all their interactions. She had said something. He had, as it turned out, been thinking similarly for slightly longer than 2 months. This was its own surprise. They had what she thought of as a head start, the knowledge, the trust, the ease. It had not made everything simple. Nothing made everything simple. But it had given them a foundation that couples without 3 years of friendship had to build. She was glad to have started there. Story 16. The anniversary. They had celebrated every anniversary. Every one, even the early uncertain ones, and the consistency had come to mean something. The anniversaries were not always large or expensive. Some had been simple, a good meal at home, a walk somewhere they liked, a conversation that took the evening to have. The content varied by the year and what the year had contained. What did not vary was the marking. She thought the marking mattered because it was a form of attention. This date, this year, this continuation. It said, "We are still choosing this, and we know it." The anniversary was not a performance for others. They did not make much of it publicly. It was for themselves, for the quiet knowledge of years accumulating in the direction of the same choice. There had been years when the anniversary had arrived in the middle of something difficult, and they had marked it anyway, and the marking had been its own thing. Not a celebration exactly, but an acknowledgement. Even in this, here. She thought those were among the most important anniversaries, the ones that arrived in hard years and were kept. Story 17. The home. They had made a home together, which was not the same as living in the same place. Living in the same place had come first. 2 people sharing space, maintaining their separate habits in proximity. The home had come later, gradually, through the accumulation of choices that were made together. The couch they had both wanted, the system for the kitchen that worked for both of them, the pictures on the walls, the way the evenings went. The home had its own culture, what they cooked and when, who called family when, the programs they watched together and the ones they watched apart, the unspoken choreography of 2 people who knew where each other would be at most hours. She had not known, before she lived with someone she loved, how much of the living was choreography. She thought the home was one of the most significant achievements of the relationship. Not because she had wanted a home, but because the home was evidence that 2 people had found a way to fit. It was not given. It was built, slowly, from thousands of small decisions made in the spirit of making it work. Story 18. The small repairs. He had noticed, over the years, that the quality of their relationship was less determined by the large events than by the small repairs. The large events, the holidays, the celebrations, the difficult passages, were visible and felt significant while they were happening. But what the relationship was made of was the space between them. The daily recovery from minor friction, the quick apology, the return to warmth after the brief cold. He had been slow to learn the small repair. He had come from a family where the repair was delayed, where things were left unkind for hours or days before being addressed, and where the addressing was indirect. He had imported this into the relationship and had had to unlearn it. The small repair was immediate or near immediate. The acknowledgement that something had landed wrong, the adjustment, the return. He had found that the return after a quick repair was easier than the return after a long estrangement, which accumulated weight the longer it was left. He tried now, when they had friction, to move toward the repair while it was still small. This did not always work, but it worked often enough that the average temperature of the relationship had, over the years, risen. This was, he thought, most of what a lasting relationship was. The cumulative effect of small repairs made promptly, of friction that did not harden before it was addressed. Story 19. Learning to fight. They had learned to fight better, which had taken about 7 years and was still ongoing. The early arguments had been bad in the way that early arguments often were: high temperature, low information. Much said that had not been thought through and that landed badly. They had both brought styles from their families of origin that were not compatible and not helpful, and the incompatibility had compounded the arguments themselves. They had talked about this in calmer moments. They had noticed the patterns. They had, between them, developed some informal rules. Don't say things you don't mean. Don't escalate if one person is trying to de-escalate. Take a break rather than continue past the useful point. The rules were not always followed. The old patterns reappeared when they were tired or stressed, but the baseline had shifted. The arguments were shorter and less damaging than they had been. The recovery was faster. The things that were said were more accurate and less cruel. She had not expected, at the beginning, that learning to fight would be a significant relationship project. She had thought love made fighting unnecessary. Love, she had found, was not the alternative to conflict. It was what made conflict navigable. Story 20. The proposal he didn't plan. He had not planned to ask her when he did. They had been walking along the canal in the early evening, and the light had been good, and she had said something that had made him laugh, and he had looked at her and had known, not as a decision but as a perception, that he was going to ask. He had asked. He had not had the ring. The ring came later. She had said yes without the ring, which was, she said later, how she would have preferred it. Without the apparatus, without the staging, just the question in its own context. He thought about the lack of planning sometimes in the years since. He had friends who had planned proposals extensively and elaborately, and he did not think better or worse of those. But he was glad his had happened the way it did. From a moment, from looking at her, from the immediate certainty that the question was ready to be asked. She wore the ring. She was glad he had asked when he did, and not when he had planned to, because the moment had been exactly right, and no planned moment could have predicted it. Story 21. The space between. She had come to think that the space between two people was as important as the connection. The connection was obvious and necessary, and she had it. The closeness, the knowing, the reliable presence of another person who knew her. But the space was what made the connection sustainable. The time apart, the individual lives, the respective friendships and interests and ways of being in the world. She had been in a relationship once where there had been very little space. She and the person had been extremely close in a way that, at the time, she had thought was the best version of closeness. She had found, in the years since, that it had been something other than that, an intensity that had fed itself by excluding other things, a closeness that was also a narrowing. She and her current partner maintained their individual lives deliberately. She saw her friends without him, and he saw his friends without her. They had things that were theirs alone. The space this created was not distance. It was what made the togetherness feel like togetherness rather than merger. She had had to learn this, and the learning had been against some of her instincts. She was glad she had learned it. The space, she thought, was what made room for two actual people to remain in the relationship rather than two people gradually fusing into a shared identity that suited neither of them. Story 22. The parent she didn't expect. She had not expected parenthood to change her relationship the way it did. She had expected the obvious changes: less time, less sleep, more practical coordination, the renegotiation of everything logistical. These had all happened as expected. What she had not expected was the way it would reveal something in her partner that she had not previously had occasion to see. He was, it turned out, a father in a way that she had not predicted, patient in a way she had not seen him be patient, attentive to the child in a way that was specific and accurate. He had found resources in himself that were genuinely new, or that had been there and unused. She had also found things in herself. She was better than she had expected in some ways and worse in others. She was more capable of a specific kind of love that she had not previously exercised. She was also more impatient than she would have wanted. They had become parents, and in becoming parents, they had become new versions of themselves to each other. She had married a person and found, in the years since, that the person was larger than what the years before had shown her. She thought this was, perhaps, the hidden thing about long relationships. You could not see all of who someone was in the beginning. You saw it over time, in the situations that disclosed it. Story 23. What lasted? She had thought, when she was young, that love was primarily a feeling, the feeling of being in love, which was intense and specific, and which she could recognize easily. In the years since, she had found that the feeling was real, and that it was also not the main thing. The main thing was the decision, made repeatedly, to continue, the choice to work on something rather than away from it, the willingness to be known fully, including the parts of herself that were not ideal, and to know someone else the same way, and to continue choosing the knowing. The feeling came and went in its intensity. It was higher in some periods and lower in others, and the variation did not indicate the state of the relationship the way she had thought it would. The relationship in the low-intensity periods was often, she had found, deeper than the relationship in the high-intensity early periods, less dramatic, more real. She had lasted. She was glad to have lasted. She had found, on the far side of the years, something that the beginning had promised but could not deliver: the steadiness, the trust, the comfort, the accumulated shared history that made every new day continuous with all the ones before it. This, she thought, was what love looked like after the beginning: quieter, realer, worth every year of the getting here. Story 24. The apology that changed things. He had apologized to her for something he had done 3 years before, and the apology, delayed as it was, had changed something. The thing had been a decision he had made unilaterally, without consulting her, on something that affected both of them. He had been right about the decision. The outcome had been good, and he had told himself for 3 years that being right about it meant the manner of making it was not worth addressing. He had come to understand that this was wrong. Being right about the decision did not excuse the manner. She had been excluded from something that was hers to be part of, and the exclusion had left a small scar that he could feel in the way she sometimes flinched from decisions that were made too quickly, too unilaterally. He had apologized without defensiveness. That had been the hard part. His natural instinct was to apologize and immediately add, "But the outcome was good." He had not added the "but." He had simply said, "I made that decision without you, and I should have included you, and I'm sorry." She had been quiet for a moment. Then she had said, "Thank you. That's what I needed." The scar did not disappear, but it had been acknowledged, and the acknowledgement had made the relationship more honest. He had learned something he tried to apply going forward. Being right about the outcome was not the same as being right about the process, and the process mattered to the person who had been excluded from it. Story 25. The Weekend Away. Once a year they went away, just the two of them, for a weekend. This had been a deliberately established thing, a conversation they had had early in the years with young children about what the relationship needed in order to remain the relationship and not simply the logistics of a household. They had identified the annual weekend as one necessary thing and had protected it for 12 years. The weekend was usually simple, a place they had not been or somewhere they liked returning to, meals that were not rushed, time that was not structured. She and he, without the children and the schedules, in the compressed space of a few days. She had found every year that the first day of the weekend required adjustment, as if she had to re-find him, re-find herself, re-find the version of them that existed outside the household. The adjustment usually happened by Saturday evening, and Sunday was always the best day for this reason, fully found and not yet leaving. The weekend did not fix anything that was wrong in the year, but it showed them, consistently, that they still wanted this, the time together, the choosing of each other without the children, and the schedules as the organizing principle. The reminder was worth the planning. Story 26. The Old Couple on the Train. She had sat across from an old couple on the train and had watched them for an hour. They had not done anything remarkable. The man read a newspaper, the woman looked out the window. Occasionally one said something to the other, and the other responded briefly. At one point the man adjusted his jacket, and the woman, without looking away from the window, reached over and smoothed a fold on his shoulder. The gesture had been entirely automatic. She had not thought about it, apparently, and neither had he. It had just happened, the way the body does things it has practiced for 50 years. She had thought about the practice embedded in that gesture, the 50 years of knowing where the other person was, of caring without ceremony, of the body's habit of attention. She had thought, "This is what I want," not the gesture specifically, the 50 years that made the gesture automatic, the long practice of tending. She had told her partner about it that evening. He had said, "I want that too." They had been together for 3 years. She thought about the 47 years they would need to practice their way to that kind of automatic, unremarkable care. She was willing to do the practice. Story 27. The Hard Year. There had been a year that was very hard. Not in one dramatic way, but in the accumulated way that some years were. And they had come through it, and the coming through had been its own kind of proof. She had needed more than she usually needed that year, and he had given more than it was easy to give. And there had been periods when the giving had shown its edges, when he was tired of the weight, when she could feel him carrying something he did not say, when they were both running low. They had not pretended the year was fine. They had acknowledged it was hard and that they were both affected by it, and the acknowledgement had helped. She had tried to be aware of what she was taking and to give back where she could. He had tried to give without keeping score. The year had ended. They had found themselves on the other side of it, looking back. They were both quieter about the year than they might have been. It had not been the kind of difficulty you narrated easily. But between them they knew what had happened, and they knew what they had done for each other in it. And the knowing was a form of intimacy that could not have been arrived at any other way. Some things were only built by going through difficult things together. She would not have chosen the year. She was glad to have someone who had gone through it with her. Story 28. The Inheritance of Patterns. She had noticed, in her 30s, that she was repeating patterns from her parents' relationship and had had to decide which ones to keep. Some she had kept willingly, the way her parents had laughed together, the way disagreements were handled without prolonged coldness, the way practicalities were shared. These patterns were good, and she had imported them gratefully. Others she had recognized with less pleasure. The tendency to manage rather than discuss, the difficulty with being direct about needs, the assumption that the other person would know without being told. She had found these in herself and had found them unhelpful, and she had worked on them, not always successfully, but consistently. Her partner had his own inheritance, his own patterns, some useful and some not. They had talked about this, the patterns they were from, the ones they wanted to build for themselves. It was useful to name them, to make the unconscious visible enough to choose. She did not think you could escape your inheritance entirely. The patterns were in the body, the instinct, the way the voice rose or fell in a certain moment. But you could work on them, and the working was real, and over the years you could build something that was more chosen than inherited. This, she thought, was the relationship as the ongoing project, not done, not arrived at, but being made, year by year, from the best of what you were and the best of what you were trying to become. Story 29. The unexpected thing about commitment. She had expected commitment to feel like restriction and had found it felt like relief. Before she understood this, she had been ambivalent about commitment in the abstract, the idea of closing off futures, of choosing this rather than everything else. She had held herself slightly apart from her relationships as a result, keeping available, maintaining the option. When she had finally committed, not in a ceremony sense but in the interior sense, the decision made fully and without reservation, she had expected to feel the loss of what she was closing. She felt something different, the release of the energy she had been spending on keeping the option open. She had not known how much energy it took until it was no longer required. The constant low-level weighing of alternatives, the mild held-backness, the unwillingness to fully invest. These were not freedom, they were their own constraint. The commitment released her from them. What she had arrived at was presence, the ability to be fully in the thing she was in without the background monitoring of whether to stay. This was, she had found, the condition in which love could actually grow. It grew in settled ground, not in the kept open space. Story 30. The Text. He sent her a text every morning that said nothing of consequence. It had started in the year they had lived apart, when the text had been a way of marking the day beginning, of saying, "I'm here, you're there, we're connected across the distance." When they had returned to the same place, the text had continued, because the habit had been built, and also because the text continued to do what they had done, say, every morning, that the other person was being thought of. The texts were absurd, usually. A complaint about the weather, a thing he had seen from the window, a question so minor it required no answer. She replied in kind. This was their morning exchange, conducted while they were in the same flat, 2 rooms apart. She had thought about what this was, once, when someone had asked about their relationship. She had said, "He sends me a text every morning." The person had looked confused. She had tried to explain that the text was not the communication. The text was the consistent small act of saying, "You are the first thing I think about in the morning, every day, for 5 years." The text was the practice of the attention, and the practice, she thought, was most of what love was. Story 31. The Couple's Therapist. They had seen a therapist together for 8 months, in a year when they had needed to. She had been resistant to this initially, not to therapy in principle, but to the implication that what they needed was help. She had come to understand the resistance was beside the point. They needed help. Help was available. The logical conclusion was to take it. The therapist had not fixed them. The therapist had given them a structured space in which to say things they had not been saying, and the saying had done the work. She had learned, in that room, that she had been asking for things in ways that did not communicate what she was asking for, and that he had been responding to what he heard rather than what she meant, and that the gap between the two had been producing a cycle of frustration that had very little to do with either of them as people. They had left the 8 months with tools, not the therapeutic tools as such. She had not been taking notes, but the habit of certain conversations, the expectation that things could be named and worked on, the knowledge that the difficulty was navigable rather than definitive. She was glad they had gone. She was glad to be with someone who had been willing to go. She thought the willingness was itself significant, the shared agreement that the relationship was worth working on, professionally and seriously, in the way you might work on anything else you valued. Story 32, the last story. What she had found, across the years of loving and being loved, was that love was a practice before it was a state. The state, the feeling of being in love, of being loved, was real and was what drew you in, but the practice was what sustained it. The daily attention, the small acts of care, the repair when repair was needed, the commitment renewed not in ceremony but in the ordinary choices of an ordinary day. She had wanted, when she was young, to be in the state permanently, to live in the heightened feeling and not have to work at what came after. She had learned that what came after was better if you did the work, not more dramatic, not more cinematic, but deeper and quieter and more reliably good. She loved him. He loved her. They had been loving each other for many years, in all the ways that many years required. She did not think the love had diminished. She thought it had changed shape, less fire, more light, still warm, still real, changed in the way that things changed when they grew. She thought she would keep choosing it. She thought she would keep building it, one ordinary day at a time. This was what she had learned about love. It was the choosing that made it, and the making was the love. Story 33, the old friend she lost. She had a friendship that had not survived, and she carried it still, years later, not with grief exactly, but with something adjacent to grief, the periodic awareness of an absence. They had been close for 7 years and had drifted, and the drift had become distance, and the distance had become the end. There had not been a rupture, no single event that made the friendship impossible. There had simply been a long period in which neither of them had crossed back, and at some point the crossing back had stopped being realistic. She had thought about what she might have done differently, She had not settled on any particular answer. It was possible that the friendship had run its course, that the 7 years had been complete in themselves and the ending was simply the ending. It was possible that one or both of them had failed to do something at a moment when it mattered. She kept the memory of the friendship with care. The things it had given her, the laughter, the specific quality of being known by someone who had been there for the particular years, those were real and were not negated by the ending. She was glad the friendship had existed. She held the ending with something more careful than bitterness. She had not given up on the possibility of hearing from her. If that happened, she would respond. Story 34. The Person You Become. She had become, over the years of loving and being loved, a different person from the person who had started. This was obvious in one sense. Everyone changed over the years, and the years of a relationship were no exception. But the change was also specific to the relationship. She had been changed by this person, by the particular way he saw her, and challenged her, and made room for her, and, occasionally, frustrated her into growth. She was more patient than she had been. She was better at saying what she needed. She had given up a habit of self-sufficiency that had kept people at a slight distance, given it up gradually, over years of being with someone who kept gently pointing at it. She was more willing to be helped. He had also changed in his own directions. He would have to speak to those. She only had access to the changes she had watched happen, from the outside and from the inside. She thought about whether she would have changed in these ways without him. She was not certain. Some changes might have come with time regardless. Some she thought were specific to the relationship, to the particular conditions he had created, to the things he had reflected back at her over years until she could see them clearly enough to act on them. This was, she thought, one of the gifts of long love, not only the love itself, but what the love made possible, the person you became in it, the person who only existed because of the years of becoming. Story 35. The New Year. Every year they sat together on the last night of the year and talked about what the year had held. Not in a formal way. They did not make structured reviews or set resolutions together. They sat, usually with something good to drink, and talked about the year in the way of two people who had been through it together. This happened, and that happened, and I remember when we did this, and I was proud of you when that happened. The ritual was simple, and she valued it more than most of the deliberate things they did. It was an annual accounting of the shared life, a reminder that the months that had passed had content, that the year had not simply elapsed but had been lived, with things in it that were worth naming. She could not have listed, in March, what the previous January had contained, but in December, looking back, the year revealed itself as a series of real and specific things. The conversation made them visible. She had kept, for several years, a brief note of what the conversation had covered. She read back through them sometimes. The accumulated years of these notes were a history she could actually read. Not a history of events exactly, but a history of what had been noticed and valued. She thought there was no better document of a life together. Story 36. Enough. She had wondered, when she was younger, what it meant to have enough, in love as in other things. The question of enough in love was strange because the answer was not quantitative. You did not have enough love the way you had enough money or enough sleep. It was more like the quality of attention, the consistency of care, the sense that the other person was genuinely interested in you and in the continuation of the thing. She had found this, and she knew it was not guaranteed. She had had it not found before, and she had known the difference. The knowing had made her careful in good ways, careful to acknowledge it, careful not to take it for granted, careful to give back in proportion to what she received. Enough did not mean perfect or frictionless or easy. It meant, this is good, and it is being tended to, and there is more good available if we keep doing the things that make it possible. She thought she had enough. She was aware this was a remarkable thing to be able to say. She tried to hold it with the gratitude it deserved. Story 37, telling the story. She told the story of how they had met at parties and noticed, over the years, that the story had changed slightly in the telling. Not the facts were the same. The way the facts were arranged, the things that were emphasized, the meaning she drew from them had evolved. The story she told at 2 years was not quite the story she told at 10 years, and was not quite the story she told at 20. She thought about what this said. She supposed the meaning of the beginning could only be known from where you were standing. At 2 years, the beginning looked like one thing, the beginning of something exciting, uncertain, new. At 20 years, the beginning looked like the beginning of this, all of this, the specific life they had built together. The beginning had always been this beginning, but only from 20 years could she see what it was the beginning of. She liked telling the story. She liked that it kept having new things in it as the years went on. She thought that a story that continued to change in the telling was a story about something still alive. Story 38, The Long View. She had learned to take the long view in relationships the way she had learned it in other things, slowly, and through not having it. The short view in relationships was the immediate temperature, how things felt right now, in this moment, in this week. The short view was real and mattered. She was not suggesting the present was not important, but it was a poor basis for most decisions. The long view was, what is the trend? Where has this been going, over months and years? What does the pattern say about the direction? The long view allowed for a difficult month without concluding from it. It allowed for a good month without being deluded by it. It held the present in its context. She had taken the long view, sometimes when a particular period was hard, and seen that the trend was still good, that the hardness was the weather, not the climate. This had helped her stay when staying was the right thing. She had also once taken the long view in a different relationship and seen that the trend was not good, that the difficult period was not weather but a direction. This had helped her leave when leaving was the right thing. The long view did not tell you what to do. It gave you more accurate information than the short view could. What you did with the information was still yours to decide. Story 39, The Quiet Love. She had been told, when she was young, to look for love that was loud, the declaration, the grand gesture, the unmistakable announcement. She had found, in the life she had actually lived, that the love worth keeping was quieter than that. It was in the listening that happened when she was tired and not interesting to listen to. It was in the cup of tea that appeared without her asking for it. It was in the remembering of what mattered to her, the small things that she had mentioned once and that had been carried forward. It was in the consistency, the being there, the not going away in the periods when she was difficult to be with. The loud love had been exciting. She did not regret it and did not dismiss it. It had been real, as a beginning, but the loud love could not sustain its own volume, and what was left after the volume came down was either the quiet love or nothing. She had the quiet love. She had woken to it every day for many years, in its undramatic and unglamorous form. She thought there was no better thing to wake to. And that is where we leave things tonight, in a kitchen on a Sunday morning, with the light coming in and two people who have chosen each other. Love in all its forms, the beginning and the long middle, the break and the repair, the thing we said and the thing we couldn't quite say, the letter written and the letter kept, the 30 years and the first year and the daily small choosing. This is most of what life is made of. You have spent tonight with these stories and these people, and their English has been moving through you as you rest. Vocabulary, rhythm, phrasing, the long sentences and the short ones, all of it being absorbed, even now while you sleep. Thank you for being here. Thank you for trusting this channel with your learning. If you would like to hear more stories like these, please subscribe. It keeps us going, and it means we can keep making content for English learners all over the world. Share us with someone you know who is learning. Leave a comment if you wake up in the night or in the morning. We will be here tomorrow and the night after that. Sleep well, and wherever you are in love's long story, be kind to yourself about it. Good night.